Show. My name is Keith Burgun. Today we will be talking about, let's open up our little thingy here. We are going to be watching, the first thing we'll be doing is watching Cohle Wehrle's talk on a defense of king-making and board game design, which has been on the to respond to list for a while. Here it is here. I think Brick Road actually recommended it. But it seems particularly, let me fix the topic here, particularly valid or, relevant based on the article I wrote the other day about cooperative games. And so, we're going to be talking about that. As always, I will wait a little bit for people to show up before I get started. But, hoping that this will be a good one. Today is April 20th. We're deep into the quarantine now. I think I'm all better, but I have lingering respiratory symptoms. There's just like a shortness of breath, kind of. I am asthmatic, so it could be that. It could be just, I don't know, some kind of lingering thing because of that. But it's not that bad. I'm basically all better. Yeah, it's just, now we're just quarantined. So what else have been going on and should I be talking about for this week? We have some new developers who have showed up at the Discord. Of course, you can support this show. By the way, if you enjoy this show, I've been uploading these clips to YouTube. If you enjoy this show, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/KeithBurgun. That's what helps me spend the time to make this content and do this kind of stuff, write articles, do podcasts, do videos every day, and work on my game, Gem Wizards Tactics. So, which is what we'll be doing tomorrow. And then on Wednesday as well. On Thursday we'll do some community games, and actually, you know what? I'm not sure about that. We're gonna do Noita. It's another one that's another game that it's kind of like a procedural roguelike kind of looking thing, and we'll give that a shot. And maybe we should do this on the same day as Noita, actually. So we don't really have a design discussion yet for Thursday, but usually what happens is over a couple of days you get a good Discord battle going on in the Discord chat. So we'll just wait for that, and whatever's happening, it's happening. Otherwise, we can pick something from this. Today, again, we are doing Cohle Wehrle's defensive king-making talk, and I also found that there was a part 2 of this that Cohle Wehrle wrote on Board Game Geek that we can kind of look through a little bit and see how that goes. But yeah, I'm interested in this conversation. Tribound, how's it going? Good to see you. Discord battles happening, So yeah, I think we're going to get started on this guy. 1.25x speed seems good. Cohle Wehrle? Oh, really? Okay. Cohle Wehrle. I remember one time when I was a little kid, I used to give my friends Cohle Wehrles, to piss them off. All right, anyway, jokes. Oh, let me do headphones too. Headphones. I knew something was missing. All right.
Designer and sort of de facto head of development at Leader Games, which is a small game studio based in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Does look a bit like Ralph Coster. We can make this bigger. There we go.
Large for a small studio, but nowhere near what an actual publisher would look like. We all still only work in one room. And over the past couple years, I have been working for them, and we together have made the game Root, which I'll be talking a little bit today.
Oh, I know that game. We haven't played that yet, though.
With my brother, where we do sort of weird history games. So I've been thinking about and designing games about conflict, about king-making, and about how uncomfortable it makes us feel for a while, and so I'm going to kind of put those thoughts together. When I originally sat out to give this talk, I thought I'd start with something like a Root postmortem.
Oh, yeah, you're right. The GDC, sorry about that. That's my bad. Boop. This should be better now.
This is GDC talk, and people seem to like picking apart dead bodies. But Root, it still feels way too early for it. We have a big Kickstarter going on right now. There's lots of content coming down the pipe, and I just don't think I have a vantage point which I could think systematically about like what Root is and what it's done well and not done well. Although if you do have questions about the creation, we can certainly talk about that in the Q&A. However, when I was thinking about this talk, as I dug into Root, I was reminded of the strangeness of the design. Now, for any of you who've sort of gone through all the paces with a big project, you know that by the end of the project, it seems like the most natural thing in the world. But with a little bit of distance, you can be reminded of how weird it is. Root is a strange game, and it's done well. You know, every year we'll kind of produce like a breakout hit. I just had never thought that anything I'd ever work on would do it. It just wasn't something that we were designing for. Now, I don't mean to sound ungrateful about any of this. Root was blessed with a wonderful creative team and a great artist. These are some drawings from Kyle Fair, and I just want to show off his talent because I get to bother him and fill out the art request list, and I want to show it.
The art is indeed very, very
good. The game is cute, it's adorable, it pulls people in, and it has a really nice pitch. So Root is an asymmetric strategy game. Now, usually when we say an asymmetric strategy game, people tend to think about it on the order of different powers in a D&D party. One person's the tank, another person might be healing, someone's a magic user or a thief. Root's really asymmetric. So dramatically asymmetric that the different player positions are almost operating in different games. So as an example, the way the pitch goes, if I were encountering you guys at PAX East or something, it's basically one player is managing a kingdom. She starts the game with full control of the board, warrior in nearly every clearing, their buildings all the places.
I can, indeed, yes. Actually, wait, is the sound up here? Yeah, it is. Okay, so I'll turn the sound up even more. All right, let me know how that is.
She's freshly conquered the woodland, and all she needs to do is keep the peace. And she's keeping the peace so that she can move her resources around and build her kingdom up. And during that process, a rebellion might break out, and she might have to deal with sympathy for the insurgents. In order to put down the rebellion, she might find help from a wandering mercenary. But if the mercenary in putting down the rebellion becomes more popular than she is, then maybe she'll have to exile that mercenary. There's no script to this. All of these interactions happen organically, and rather than these different events sort of being dictated by a draw of an event card, each one of these different positions is essentially a different player. One player plays, you know,
a quick note. A lot of GDC talks, and you know, I've done this myself, are advertisements for a product that someone is like currently trying to sell. And I'm not saying that that's what this is, or I mean, they're partially that. So like this is definitely overall. I'm you know, we're getting the pitch for this game. I feel like, which I'm excited to play this game. I'm sure it's quite cool. But it's just interesting that like. It's one of the best ways probably to market your game is to do a talk where you're like, okay, what's the game design cool thing about this game? And then I can just name the talk, the cool thing about the game design, and then I can be like, oh, and, you know, funny, I have an example that comes to mind. It's this game that I'm marketing right now, it's smart and good, and I've definitely done that myself. So just a note.
Essentially an adventure game working within the larger game. The player who's playing the rebellion is having to be is essentially playing a political game underneath the economic game that the Marquise de Cat is playing.
Bit of an early start,
usually
yeah.
Around this time, if I'm at a convention, I'll turn around the box and they'll see these really cute meeples.
But just as a refresh, Brick Road, he's only just talking about Root so far. He didn't He didn't say anything really yet. Well, devs aren't the primary audience for the games, but devs are very influential. So if you can get devs excited about games, all the players follow devs, and if devs are talking about like, oh, I'm really into this new game Root on Twitter or whatever, like that can have an impact, I think. At least that's the theory. I didn't say that this theory actually works, but I think that it is an operating theory.
Sold on the spot because look at that meeple. But before I ring them up on the register, I have to be as straight as possible with them. Root is not a game for everybody. Usually the test I give to prospective buyers looks something like this. Are you okay with the fact that one of your friends is going to put pieces on the board and then another one of your friends is going to remove those pieces? And
actor removal. EY Priest says, my friends worked on Prismata and they said that they would do things like write game design or Hearthstone or MTG content or whatever on Reddit and just have a link to the game at the bottom of the post. Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff, like, especially if you do it consistently, like, I think it's as good marketing as anything. You know, there's a good case to be made that all marketing, like, doesn't work. But, like, it all kind of does work, too, you know?
And they might laugh at you when they do it. And if you can pass that test, you're probably a good candidate to buying it. There's just no getting around it. The game is very, very mean. And it's mean in a way that is a little out of step with not only the kinds of games that sell to a broad audience in the hobby market, but also a more general design ethos. Now, it's mean. I think when we talk about the meanness, I should be specific what I'm talking about. There are no catch-up mechanisms. There's a lot of direct player interaction. Some of it is zero-sum. I'm going to take something and you can't have it. It's also got a really, really high variance. Depending on the faction mixes, the play styles, all of the things around the actual playing of the game, a round of Root can look very, very, very different.
Oh, that's what.
And I
okay.
don't want to hide that from the players. Now, usually, these sorts of elements are kind of regarded as a little bit old-fashioned, and they get polished out in the development process. I've been fortunate to be on the development teams for many games, and I know that when a game goes from design to development, the questions shift, right? When you're designing a game, you're trying to make an impression. You're trying to capture the imagination of your prospective publisher. But when you're developing a game, you're trying to make sure that you're not going to make your players mad, right? I mean, it's a wholly different set of skills. You don't want to make your players mad. You want them to come back to like it. You don't want like hate mail on BGG or really angry Reddit threads. So when Root started moving from design to development, I was a little worried because of the things that I really liked about the game were the things that I knew were going to be totally destroyed in development. Thankfully, Patrick Leader, our owner and creative director, had the temerity to also let me be on the development team, which is an awful decision. You should never allow a designer to work on development. I really love development, and I love the process of cutting something apart that I've spent a year building. But I worked really hard to make sure that even as we made the game more elegant and as we sort of cut it up nicely, that the weird parts were the parts that stayed. So today I want to talk a little bit about the sharp edges of Root, the meanness of the game. And I want to do this not by talking about Root, but instead.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've heard this use. Like I sort of have, but like it's the difference between design and develop. I mean, I guess to me that's like there's no like two distinct phases. Like, oh, I'm in the design phase. Now I'm in the development phase. To me, it's like it's a continuum. Like you're actually doing a little bit of development early on. And then you're still doing a little bit of design towards the end, and they kind of just like crisscross like that, right? That's kind of how I see it. Or like not even like a straight crisscross, like a messy. Sometimes it's like, oh shoot, we're going back to design in like a significant way at some point. But I also understand that like as when something has a budget and there's like employees or like people working on a thing that and it's their job, that maybe this has to be more like of a discrete kind of thing.
Instead of by talking about why we think of those things as sharp edges in the first place and what we might be losing when we don't explore them. And so in order to launch this exploration, I think we have to think about a sort of central term, and that term for me is kingmaking. Because ultimately, Root is a game about kingmaking. I always have like a good laugh when I see a thread and someone's like, oh man, Root, I heard that it has a kingmaking problem. And I'm like, it doesn't have a kingmaking problem, it is the kingmaking problem. And it's a political game. I mean, if you're making a political game, it makes sense that you're dealing with concepts like power brokers, right? But the fact that we oftentimes get friction there from...
So before we go further, because I just want to have like a because not, you guys who are in the chat all understand like where I'm coming from with my critique and analysis and response to this. But, I'm also uploading these a lot of times to YouTube, and I feel like I should take a little bit more time to just kind of like remind people where I'm coming from and where my critique is coming from. And so like, I remembered that I wanted to say that, but I don't remember where I was going with it. But the basic concept is like, this is kind of related to what I was talking about. There is a question about like political questions, something like kingmaking and like whether that kind of stuff is acceptable in a strategy game. Because of the fact that like, it's relying on like human, like I just don't like this guy, or like it's fun to bully this guy. My group has this like joke where we bully this one guy a little bit, like maybe not even in a mean way, but we're always ganging up on this one guy, and it's to me just my where I'm coming at this from. What's up, Dad Nista? What I'm coming at this from is like a skepticism about kingmaking. I do like that he's got this thing of like, he's like diving into it and like making it straight up like, I want Kingmaking. This is Kingmaking the game. That's a good, if you're going to have Kingmaking, at least lean into it and make it this social thing. But I think that this kind of like social machine would be very distinct from the kinds of machines that we're talking about. It could have a lot in common, but it's going to be its own, animal. It's going to be a party game. It's going to be a social party game, is the short way to put it. It's sort of similar to the Yomi argument, where social elements enter the game space and fuzz things up, or more than fuzz things up, completely flip the table. I can't tell you how many times I've played even a game like, I love Bonanza a lot, but there would be these situations sometimes where we have this one player who's very good at all strategy games, and he, like, we would just be like, no one trade with him. And then it's like, oh, now he's just going to lose because no one's going to trade with him. And so it's kind of it's really not a a tenable situation, I think, for strategy games to be in.
People wanting to buy the game or from critics, I think suggests that we are currently in a tabletop era that is really locked into a certain kind of design.
It is an extreme example, but I make it to make the point, because the smaller versions of that are happening all the time. And there are impacting the outcome a lot, even if they're smaller than that. There's a level of that where it can serve as a handicap for the better strategy game player, if you're lucky, and it doesn't handicap someone else, the second best player. But it's like, yeah, I mean, also you can make the same argument for randomness, for like serious, like very strong randomness in a game, that could make it so that the best player doesn't win. But it could also kind of go the other way and make the best player win even more, because it's random. And those kinds of human interactions, those human randomness doesn't have any player control. That's true that, like, yeah, this kind of dynamic, players sort of have control over it to some extent. Players do generally at least try to hurt the best player. That's true. Yeah, there is that kind of dynamic there, which makes it better than randomness. But that's my point. EY Priest says, if you let the players balance their own game, they might not do it very well. Exactly. And also if we care about the, like, what's being built in terms of like meaning, systemic meaning throughout the system, then we don't really want players to just sort of arbitrarily decide outcomes, which is kind of what Kingmaking is. It's players being like, hey guys, who do we think should win this one? You? Me, you? And it's like, well, we could have just done that, We don't really need the game for that. I mean, that's an extreme, example, obviously, but anyway.
So we're going to start by talking a little bit about Kingmaking, and I'm going to try to trace why I think it's fallen out of fashion. And then I want to marshal a sort of like simple defense for Kingmaking, and then talk about some practical lessons for those would-be practitioners out there. So, Kingmaking, the act of making someone king, it's pretty simple. The term is actually a little bit more interesting than that. It starts with this guy. There he is, Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick. By the way, you're going to get a lot of like stupid, no animation PowerPoints from me with old pictures, because I come from an academic background, and that's how we do our PowerPoints. So this guy, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick the Kingmaker, he was called during the War of the Roses. That title was used almost entirely derisively, because he was, when we're back in the era of the divine right of kings, if you have someone, a human, deciding who to become king, that's an awful heretical idea. And so it falls out of fashion pretty quickly, although, and just a little note, so the game on the right is Avalon Hill's famous game Kingmaker, which I always thought was named after like the king-making problem, but it's actually, no, it's about Mr. Earl of Warwick over there. Now, an interesting thing happens in the 18th century, so a few hundred years after that. The historian David Hume, right? You didn't think I was going to go there, but here we are in the 18th century. He starts using the word kingmaker in a very positive way, and he loves Richard Neville, because for him, to be master of your age was to be in a position where you got to determine the course of history.
I know, more
so
birds.
The kingmakers are the real heroes.
We still haven't gotten into any of the nitty gritty. We're like just reaching his point, basically, at this point. There was basically like 9 minutes so far, 7 so minutes of talking about what Root is, his game Root. And now we're talking about, we're just getting started. This is like a historical preamble. I don't know.
Okay. So here a slight bit of disclosure is needed. I love games when I get to make the king, even if I don't get to be the king. And oftentimes, I even enjoy the experience when it fires against me. When I was sort of looking for pictures deep inside of Board Game Geek, I stumbled into this one. circa 2006 in the Twilight Imperium. It's in the Twilight Imperium image gallery, guys. And this is a rare shot of me playing a game of Twilight Imperium at the moment someone has stolen the victory from me by passing an idiotic law. And I just, there's hatred in those eyes. But also, that's a game that stuck in my mind. When I stumbled on this picture, which I'd completely forgotten about, I remembered so many things about that game, including the fact that we were playing in a weird, like, attic-y space, and we only had 3 hours to play. So we played a game of Twilight Imperium in 3 hours, if you could possibly believe it. So, even talking about Kingmaking and thinking about the idea that it might be desirable for you to steal a victory from your friend and to be mean to each other, it provokes, even me, a fan of the genre, it provokes a really physical response. My stomach turns a little and I cringe. This is strange because...
Yeah. Well, I kind of was compelled to re-say the thing that I said before, but like, you know, if we believe in the sort of the strategy game as a system, you don't want anything to just like overturn the outcome, because the outcome should actually be a reflection of the systemic, you know, like what has been done throughout the game. And the idea of Kingmaking being you know, an arbitrary player decision that is not necessarily connected to the system. It also has this problem of, it reminds me a little bit of dynamic difficulty adjustment, mid-game dynamic difficulty adjustment, because like optimal play in such a game is to like be in second place, so that when the Kingmakers come and decide to like fuck over the first place player, then you can win. And it's like, you actually kind of have a little bit of this like inverted, like you're actually not trying to win too hard kind of thing, which I guess someone could say is interesting. Anyway, I just wanted to like say more about my one step further. Why is it important for the outcome to reflect the optimalness of the decisions? Dance to be second, right? Sandbagging, yeah. So yeah, I guess, you know, I mean, that's a big topic. Why is it important for the, I mean, the basic concept of a strategy game, at least my understanding of it, is that not every game has to be a strategy game, as Crash Mode says. I think that the reason I feel like it's fair to put these critiques on things like he seems to be talking about, like the king-making problem is something that gets applied to strategy games, right? Like, if it's a pure party game, people wouldn't really say it has a king-making problem. That is a critique within the world of strategy games. And so, yeah, we should probably talk about why the optimalness of the... Well, actually, Brick Road, didn't you coin a term for that, which was skill compensation, right? Or something like that. I think it was something along those lines. But I would put it as like when you when you make inputs into a system, you are doing it towards a goal, and that goal gives you a sort of a yes or no, a binary value of like, yes, you succeeded, or no, you did not succeed. And that sort of goes back and informs everything that you did up to that point. And that's like the basic, system like for how strategy games work. And so for players to come in and arbitrarily overturn that in the context of a strategy game seems bad to me. But I also agree that not everything has to be a strategy game. And I think that, if I were him, if I was teleported into his body right now, I would actually be like, and the answer is, if you want Kingmaking, make it a party game, make it a social game, like really commit to that. And maybe that's what he's going to say, because not everyone has this like super defined idea of strategy game the way that I do. But yeah, I would say commit to making it a pure social political game. To strategize in a party game implies lying generally. Yeah. Yeah, and we can also talk about, those kind of questions as well.
We all have opinions about games. You might like party games, or you might like games about panzer tanks in World War II. But, your distaste for panzer tanks doesn't lead you to have your stomach turn. Kingmaking, on the other hand, is attacking something really basic. And as someone who plays games and designs them and also tries to really earnestly study them, that physical response is interesting because it seems different from other ways of other preferences that we express about our games. So, why do
I
you
agree.
dislike
People
Kingmaking so
still
much? Where does
pursue
this
a
dislike
goal
come
if
from?
skill
Is it always with us?
compensation. People still pursue a goal if skill compensation is lowered. That's true. But as we've talked about with randomness, the reason that we are, as you lower that, it means that players have to play more and more times to get meaningful feedback. And it's like, did I lose that one because this guy was kind of just pissed off at me from, I don't know, this morning I like didn't do the dishes or something? Or did I lose that one because I actually made bad choices in the system? And in a party game, in a social game, you know, the basic feedback engine is the people and the dynamics with the people. And yeah. Okay, so why do we dislike Kingmaking so much?
Invention. I sort of want to start here with this really, really broad historical frame because I think one thing that happens when we talk about games is we think about them as very new. And we like to think about, oh, you remember back when Catan came out? That was like the ancient age of board games, which is of course not true. But because the modern iteration of this art form is only 30 years old, we like to extend our timeline, and we think in gold ages and silver ages, and we're really talking about just a couple decades. So I think this is a very, very unremarkable thesis, but it's needed here. We don't like Kingmaking because we like fairness. Fairness is really, really critically important to how we think about games, what we want them to do, and all the rest. We generally view our games as a contest of skills and experience. And we have this idea in the back of our minds that it's going to be fairly decided. That's important. And this leads us to sort of weird mental leaps of logic that aren't all.
Okay, I have to jump in here. To me, fairness is not what it's about. Fairness is a like sort of like a socially like commonly understood concept that is similar to the real thing, but it's not the real thing. Fairness isn't the actual thing that is desired. It is that you're building meaning into the system towards this goal. You know, every time you make a choice, there is you're like imbuing game objects with meaning because you chose something, and so now the fact that I placed this stone here sort of represents something about my strategic understanding of the system, like what I'm trying to do, you know, where I am in this strategy arc or whatever. And so you're imbuing the system with meaning, and you want the final outcome to be meaningful in that same way. It's not about fairness. Now, it just so happens that is fair in a sense. But fairness isn't really what we want because the reason that fairness is a shitty metric is because here's something that would be fair. Two people are going to sit down together and they're going to play chess. And okay, this one guy is way better than this other person. But it would be more fair if they both won each one game each. So you're going to win one game, then you'll win the next game, okay? And that'd be fair. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't like I'm just responding to the general concept of fairness in games and how I do not use that word because it's something that's fair could be actually really not meaningful. So that's my general take on the concept of fairness in game design.
Always necessary. So for instance, when you sit down and play Catan, you might roll very well in the first half of the game, and everybody else thinks, well, I built my cities on all of those 6s and 8s, and it'll be my day soon. And even the person who's experiencing the good luck knows that maybe their luck is going to fall off. Now that's nonsense. You know, it's possible an 8 is never rolled in an entire game of Catan. But even if you play something as capricious as Yahtzee, there's a general sense that we are all experiencing the same kind of luck, and we all need to make the most out of what is doled to us. Now, this is a totally new and crazy way of thinking. I think that we live in an age that is really preoccupied by fairness, or at least the appearance of fairness. As anyone knows, the world is not a very fair place at all. And this was a little more obvious when you go backwards. Consider, for instance, Trojan War. See, I told you guys, I warned you. Fairness is pretty new. I mean, think about the Trojan War, right? Won by a tricky person doing a tricky trick, and how dirty of him to sneak a bunch of people in within a fake horse. And in fact, Odysseus as a hero is prized for his guile. He's a trickster hero. We love him for it. There's nothing fair about the whole thing. this can be broadly expanded to a lot of the ways that people have written and thought about games since the inception of games themselves. Some of the
Yeah, so the problem is, Marcus says, the crouch mode says, don't preempt the video. But the thing is, like, he's gonna spend a while now sort of like attacking like a straw man version of what I would say, or not, it's just a different argument. I wouldn't make the argument that the problem with Kingmaking is that it's not fair. Brickroad says, so when there's Kingmaking, those moves still get imbued with meaning, and that meaning ripples through other players. It gets mixed with their strategic understanding and comes out their next moves, which also imbue new meaning. The meaning chain is not severed, it's just run through social processes. Yeah, but it's like, well, then, the game rules system has its own logic and its own like sort of universe of meaning, and then the interpersonal stuff is very distinct, and it's sort of like how, you could make a similar argument for what you're saying for dice rolls, right? You're just mixing the way that the dice bounced around with the systemic meaning. And so I would say you could say the same. I'm not sure if you're agreeing that you could use dice in the same way. It's like the cake baking stuff. The interpersonal stuff is connected to the systemic stuff, like who is doing well and who is not factors into the social considerations. Yeah, that's true. But it's like, I already brought up the point of like, so there's this like self-balancing sort of, or not self-balancing, like a dynamic difficulty adjustment sort of thing that happens there, where like, oh, you're doing well, so now you get punished on this social level. At the very least, we could agree that there's two different distinct things. There's the social world, and there's the actual like rules and what's happening in the dynamics of the system. And my complaint, and the reason I have a problem with Kingmaking, is that it's, or any of that kind of like social fuckery, is that the. And the thing is, it can be obliterating. It can completely obliterate the meaning of the system. Like you say, it's not obliterated, but it is very powerful. A simple example, says Brickroad, a simple example is that in a good strategy game, it's difficult to determine who is ahead. Therefore, bashing the leader is baked into good decision making. There's like a kind of good decision making there. But you're not even sure that that's what people necessarily want to do, like all the time. So it's pretty noisy. Social interactions are notoriously noisy and hard to quantify and hard to predict. We've talked for a while about how execution's a form of randomness. Social interactions are almost like even more random in some ways. How someone's going to respond. Like, someone could just be like, oh, you think I'm going to bash the leader? Like, well, screw you. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to bash nobody, or I'm going to bash the second place person, or whatever. It's very arbitrary. And it's very relying on people's personalities. The meaning doesn't seem to make games more fun, though, so why should we aim to preserve it? Okay, I don't know if I can respond to that one. Bashing the leader is a game of chicken. Whoever wastes resources. I would say that all fun. I am going to respond to that one. All fun comes from meaning, systemic meaning, of any kind. And we're just talking about one specific kind of systemic meaning, like strategy game meaning. And and if you're saying like I don't like strategy games at all, I really don't enjoy strategy games, then okay, yeah, that's fine. Bashing the leader is a game of chicken. Whoever wastes resources attacking the leader just helps the other players. They're not random. They reflect each player's understanding of the game state and who is ahead. Normal Bird says, without meaning, games can feel pointless. Tribound says, social interactions have this whole extrinsic dynamic going on where IRL feuds and grudges can play a role in who gets targeted for the bashing, or like who is known as the best player. I can tell you with certainty that I had a board game group where we had a best player who would win most of the time in every game, because and he was one of these people who just like took a very long time with his turns. And if there was a game where you could like anti-king make him, there was many times when he got anti-king maked. And it's like, I think it's kind of sucks if he's winning all the games. But I also kind of think it sucks maybe even more if players are just like, I don't want you to win a lot of games. It's like my chess example. What would be fair in chess would be that I win 50% of the games against this grandmaster. I think that would be fair. That's kind of like what it's like. It's players arbitrarily choosing the win rates of other players. And yes, maybe they're responding to, they're not just, it's not like literally like randomly choosing, but they're just explicitly sort of choosing like, okay, you're too good at this, so I'm going to say you don't win this one. That's not very meaningful. I mean, it's like, that's the thing too, is that like that dynamic is not, it's not arbitrary. It's just flipping the table. It's just reversing the outcomes. And I just don't see how that's very meaningful, I guess. Let's see. Dad Nista says, this is all just a function of the, quote, what skill is it that we want to test in this game question? Yes. And to Keith, the answer is always for strategy games, your understanding of that system. Well, what I would say is, because I do see room for social games, but I think for strategy games, yes, that's kind of the core essential thing of what makes a strategy game, is that your understanding of the system, making these decisions in this system that reflect your understanding of the system towards a goal. That's a particular kind of system. That's the kind of system I'm generally concerned with. And then party games, I think, are kind of going in their own, they have their own values about creating interpersonal things. Hey, Pete Potato, how's it going? They're not saying he won't win. They're nudging it down to whatever degree they think is appropriate. Yeah, but sometimes they are saying he won't win. That's what kingmaking is. Kingmaking means we, the players, are going to choose who wins. That's what they're referring to with Kingmaker. I mean, it doesn't always reflect in that like one-to-one way where it's like I'm literally going to choose who wins, but sometimes it totally is. I'm just going to choose, hey, everyone around the table, who do we think should win this game? Like it literally is like that. So could Kingmaking just be a problem of its strength? Like the mechanisms of Kingmaker were weaker and beatable and they'd feel less arbitrary and meaningless? Yes. And that so like, 100% strength is like at any point all the players can just choose who wins. Right? That's like the most strong. And then as you tone that down and down and down and down and down and down, it gets better and better and less harmful until you reach 0, at which point it's the least harmful. So that's what you should do, is have 0 kingmaking. Anyway, let's keep going.
First records of games of chess being played were games where cheating took place, and then people were often killed afterwards, which is why they bothered to write it in the first place. You can stumble upon that. If you just search like history of chess and cheating, like it is incredible the number of people who have died because they slid their, they just happened to find a way to put their queen on the board in the late game. There's a famous anecdote about Napoleon being awful at chess, but the other anecdote about Napoleon in chess is that usually at the end of his game, the person who's playing this would notice that like both of the bishops were on the same color, but by that point Napoleon had like whisked away and was doing some real conquering. But and it was actually there. I mean, I won't get into all this stuff because I could go on all day. There was a sense that like even cheating was part of the game and what you could get away with at the table. I mean, it was all part of it. I mean, really, bridge, for those of you who've taken any look at bridge, so much of that game is what is the cool informal communication system that we can arrive at without anybody realizing that we're sort of breaking the rules of bridge without really breaking the rules of bridge. When I was teaching at the University of Texas, we often used this story called The Queen of Spades by a guy named Alexander Pushkin. And it's an interesting story in the context of this.
I have an increased playback, 1.25x speed.
Talk because basically it's about a game of Pharaoh, a gambling game. And the main character, his name's Herman, he's an engineer, and he hates games. He hates how capricious, how seemingly unfair they are. And then he discovers that there might be a trick to Pharaoh, a secret strategy which will lead him to always win. And like so many addled users of BGG, he hunts the forums and he figures out exactly what the critical trick is to win at Faro. And he figures it out, and he cheats a bunch of people out of their money. How unfair for the people he played against. And then in typical Russian narrative logic, he loses all of his money and goes insane. So unfair for the people he cheated, unfair for himself, unfair for everybody. That's games. Now, it may seem a little...
Yeah, I when he was describing that, like, people cheating at chess thing, I'm like, especially the Napoleon thing, that sounds like mythology to me. I don't think, like, that's the thing too. Remember, like, the Go example about, yeah, maybe if people are really drunk, but like, you know, when you walk into a room and someone's already playing Go and they have this like just mess of stones everywhere and you're like, oh my God, what the hell is going on? But when you're the one actually placing all those stones, you're imbuing all that meaning, and it actually makes it pretty easy to remember all these shapes and stuff, which is why the idea of someone cheating at chess sounds like baloney to me. But maybe if people are drinking enough, yeah.
Little trite to just be talking about literature in this way. Like, obviously I'm drifting a little bit from the stakes of games, but I want to just make sure that we all realize that this ethos of unfairness, this extended to many different spheres of life.
Yeah,
One
George
quick
Washington
example
cutting down the
I'll give
cherry tree.
everyone
It sounds like that, one of those kind
is
of
the
things.
trial by ordeal and by combat. So this is a sort of judicial test, a bit of jurisprudence, where basically, if you don't know whether or not someone is telling the truth, you just start lighting them on fire, or you dump them in the water, and if they're telling the truth, God will save them. And if they're not, then obviously they were wrong. Now, that seems insane to us, but what the critical thing is that, like, fairness wasn't important. It was this like capital T truth that was looming behind things, and the capital T truth could be paradoxical and could be rotten and all of those things. Now, in Germany, the fabled land of board games, in ancient Germany, they sort of spun this into a tradition known as trial by combat. And what's interesting about even trial by combat is you don't practice it, or you're not supposed to.
But
it's not about like the bigger guy is always going to win in a trial of combat. It's the person who's right. They get to win. So this is always, the thing about might versus right that sometimes gets forgotten is, in so many sort of dogmatic logics, might is given to the people who are right. It's not like I'm strong, so I'm going to pin you down to the ground and make you do whatever I'd like you to do, which is a very like modern way of viewing it. It's like, no, God has appointed certain people to be strong, and then they also carry a kind of rightness with them. And the more modern like spinning of dueling and honor, all that, it kind of flies out from this. Now, I'm going to stop here sort of with the historical stuff to just step back and say that, okay, so right now, and if we think about the modern design ethos, how we think about games and what makes a good game and a bad game, fairness is very important. And here we have one man shooting another man probably over something really stupid, although not in this case because it's Hamilton and Burr. So how do we get to fairness? Where does it come from? Now, I'm not going to give you guys a full chronology of fairness because we've got more interesting things to talk about, but there is a very easy short history of it, which is to say we can talk about Victorian morality. Now, this is the origin of board games in the modern sense. So board games come about in the 19th century, and they're the result of basically three things. One, printing got really cheap. You get steam presses, it's easy to to manufacture, you've got a factory system that can glue things onto pasteboard, so they get very cheap. More people know how to read, which you need for a lot of these early board games. And the last thing is you have a sense of, a utilitarian sense that maybe we should be teaching people things. So this is a very early board game from 1843 called The Mansion of Happiness by a guy named George Fox. And like most Victorian board games, it's a roll and move. How fun. You basically make no decisions, and you land on spaces, and then you either get to go further if you landed on a space where you did something good, or you go backwards if you did something naughty. And the reward of the game is you get into heaven, which is also nice. Now, what is really wild here is like life is still in circulation, guys. Like we have not moved past this point really at all. We just have a more colorful spinner. And in 1886, this is one of many, I love this, the game of the district messenger boy, or merit rewarded. Now, what is interesting about this second game is that it's not couched in spiritual terms. Basically, if you do things that are good and nice, then you get money in the game, and you get more and more money, and then eventually you're Andrew Carnegie. Now, some of you might be noticing a weird disconnect here. So here's a game that is maybe teaching you about the dangers of gambling, but you're rolling a die. So like I roll the die and I landed on, oh dang, bet all my money in cards, go back. And then someone else rolls the die and they say, you gave up gambling, advance. But we both rolled a die. So there's a weird mechanical and thematic friction happening here. And I think a lot of our current design ethos comes out of a desire to fix this problem. So we arrive then at the fun and fair design ethos. Games should delight and they should instruct. So we want, like those happy Victorian children, we want to learn in our games, we want to be enriched by them, and we want to be delighted by them. But in order to make the games coherent, you need to make it so that skill and experience are rewarded by victory. And I think basically everything about how...
So I think this is exactly the reverse of how I would put this. Like, skill and experience are reward. Let him finish this slide, actually.
Practice design sort of comes out of this tension, right? We want our games to be fair, because if they're not fair, then we're not teaching the lesson that we want to teach. But if you have a game be charged with something like morality, right? If you win the game, you are the most economical, you are the most virtuous. Then what the game is also doing is sort of like in Calvinist fashion, separating out the damned from the saved, the winners from the losers. And anybody who's ever lost a friend or a family member over a game of Monopoly realizes that there's like a real charge to this, right? Okay. So remember how at the beginning, when I was talking about Kingmaking...
Have people actually lost friends and family friends and family over games of Monopoly? Like, I know that like people definitely get pissed off at each other playing Monopoly. But like, really? Like, oh yeah, I haven't talked to my father in 20 years because of this game of Monopoly that we played.
I was feeling a little queasy. Looking at these Victorian children also makes me...
But yeah, anyway, I think this is kind of backwards. Like, skill and experience should be rewarded by victory. So like, I would just phrase that differently. That like, it's not about rewarding them. It should be reflected by the outcome. Your understanding of the system, skill and experience, should be reflected by the outcome. Is the way I would put it.
Makes me feel queasy because I feel like fairness itself is a little storied, and when you start thinking about it, when you start thinking about the cool games that we're making as part of...
Actually, the one thing I will say that I like about this talk is that the idea of fairness, the mythological idea of fairness, is... I know he's not making this point himself, but he did construct this, though, as his idea of what people typically think of, and so I'm just comparing it against that. But yeah, you're right. I do like his general dismissal of fairness as a concept, because, but I also think that he's sort of embracing it. Like, I wish that there had been another thing for him to push against, because I feel like fairness is bullshit. Even my idyllic version of strategy games, it's not fair. In a sense, it's horribly crushing that if you play against someone who's much better than you, they're gonna beat you all the time, and there is a way in which that's sort of unfair. Like maybe they had more time to. I mean, there's all kinds of like life reasons that they may be better than you. They've had more free time than you to play this game, and they've had more access to resources that can allow them to get good. They have a group of friends or whatever. They have all kinds of things that you don't have. So there's always an unfairness, and so that's, I guess, maybe the one thing I would give so far is that I like that there is this addressing of the concept of fairness as entirely like a sort of mythological thing. Let's keep going.
An ideological program, it makes the games a lot less cool. So it actually gets a lot worse. When I was a graduate student, I stumbled into this book, J.A. Magnan's, The Game Ethic and Imperialism. I apologize for that just awful type of the title. I literally stumbled into this book. It was in a free stack in a box, and I just tripped over it as I was walking down the hallway. And at the time, I was working on a game about Afghanistan and thinking a lot about sort of turn-of-the-century game design. And so I just put the book in my bag and thought, cool, I'm going to learn about H.G. Wells's war games and maybe something about Empire and something like that. And it was, like any book that you acquire, it takes like a year to actually open it up. And when I did open it up, I found that it was actually about something quite different, which is the game's ethic. And I think this is a really useful and powerful idea. So the basic argument that Magnan makes is this. Sports, games in general, as a competitive and serious hobby, they emerge in the 19th century public school system in Britain. Now, the public school system it means something in Britain, in the British context, that's different from the United States context. So in the US, when we talk about public schools, we just mean state-controlled schools. In the British context, public school is about the management of empire and the management of the broader sort of governmental and bureaucratic apparatus of the state. So Addiscombe and a lot of other schools were basically founded to staff the British imperial venture abroad because they needed clerks, right, in India. So what Megan talks about is like games, early games, were not about being fit or having fun. Like the delight part was just the lure. It was just the loot box to get you to play again. Actually, there was an ideological program at work, and here's how he describes it. Basically, the school administrators were convinced in the desirability of games, especially team games, in training the young. This is a quote from him. They believed in the value of those games for the development of ethical behavior. They had a view of education that was not only national, but also imperial. They saw it as their duty to give a lead to the imperial world. So all these schools start spreading throughout India, and they're having Indian cricket teams, and all the best teams in cricket these days are Indian teams.
This is my favorite part of the talk so far. It has, so far, like a tenuous connection to the basic concept of the talk, but I love that, and I think this is true of all games, that that there is an ideology being behind every game, and that on some level, we sometimes can't see it because it's just reinforcing an ideology that we all accept as like completely universal truth. But there's always an ideology being put forward in these games, in all games. And that's really good. So, this would counter like one of these claims of like, oh, why are you putting politics in my game all of a sudden? And it's really just because now they can see the politics because the politics slightly vary from their dominant, universalized political ideas.
But it was part of the civilizing mission to sort of teach fairness and to teach rules and law, because all of those things reflected the sort of ideological program of the British state. Now, this can seem a little distant from us, right? Here we are at San Francisco, at GDC, and we are so very far from the imperial program. But what you should know is that this tradition is still very much with us, and many of you guys are somewhat indoctrinated into it, including myself. I'm sorry to break your bubble. So rugby, we know, the game of rugby, it comes in name from the rugby school. It spawned a whole genre of novels called the British boarding school genre, including a novel called Tom Brown's School Days, which was the blueprint for Harry Potter, of course. Harry Potter is an English boarding school drama. He's learning right now how to be a good little imperial servant, even though he doesn't think of himself that way. But if you get good at Quidditch, you'll get good at Empire. Now, the point of all this is not to suggest that fairness is wrong and that sports don't teach you good things about being a person and existing in society. It's just that I think that we have a lot to gain from giving ourselves a little bit of distance from the concept and for starting to imagine, or maybe not imagine, but starting to treat the history of fairness as storied, right? If you are shooting for fairness in a design you're working on, you're making a kind of value judgment, and you should just keep that in mind as you're peddling your design. So what happens then if we look for a different framework to design from? Maybe not an overall rejection of fairness, but just downgrading its value. Suddenly things like spite and being mean for no reason, like what if those are able to do something? Well, I think when you boil everything away, this shift in design priorities leads fundamentally to games where the winner is decided by a cabal rather than some sense of like individual merit. In other words, we're talking about Kingmaking. This, of course, being an old cover of the excellent game Diplomacy. So
I'm going to preempt the speaker now and say that a way that this could go that is interesting to me is king-making systems or social systems where, and I think he sort of like nodded at that moments ago. These kind of systems are actually better than strategy games because they are social and because they don't have this sort of meritocratic sort of ideology that's being pushed under them, that's being pushed with them. And I certainly agree and admit that strategy games, these systems of like understanding that are about mastery and this kind of stuff, and have these binary outcomes and that's sort players and all this kind of stuff, that these are real things, and that a social game where players use their interpersonal social abilities to sort of collectively decide something, that a case could be made that is, in the broad spectrum of, human endeavors, a better thing to make. And I think that's a very valid argument. I don't know if that's where he's going, but I think that that is a valid thing to say. Leaning into social dynamics. I mean, I think there's something there for sure. What I would maybe counter with is like, well, what about one-player games, one-player strategy games? because obviously that's where I think we should go. And cooperative games, of course. Cooperative games don't really have this issue either. Sure, and he thinks, Brickroad says, and he thinks those can be combined with strategy games to get some of the merits of both. Well, that's what I'm like, don't do that. No. That's where I would disagree with him. I can respect leaning, although, I mean, social games can certainly have some elements of that you could see in a strategy game, of course. Every social game does, even like super lightweight ones. Pardon me. Yeah. So maybe I wouldn't disagree with that super strongly, but I would just recommend like keeping them as two distinct aesthetics, maybe. I don't know. Goals.
So I want to tell you now and just offer a short defense of Kingmaking as a concept and how we can go about that defense, and then I'll talk about some design takeaways and sort of like practical.
I do think he could have probably got here a lot faster than he did.
First on narrative grounds, because I think that games are fundamentally a storytelling medium. Even when we're talking about games like The Estates or Chicago Express or some nerdy train game that has a spreadsheet in it, the biggest Math Fest game is still a storytelling game. It's communicating a kind of narrative. And so the critical language that we use to talk about stories is just well appointed to talk about games. In this sense, I think that we can talk about games in terms.
Brickroad says, if you think of it as a social game with strategy added or a strategy game with social added is kind of irrelevant. Yes, in either case, I would put both of those things that you listed as social games. A strategy game would be a thing that doesn't have the social component at all. So whether you think about it in one way or the other, it doesn't matter to me, really.
It was a cliche. So we know, for instance, that in romantic comedies, or comedies more general in the classic sense, that they're going to end in a marriage. That's a narrative cliche. Likewise, you know that when you're done playing like an empire builder, that everything that you did is going to cash out and really like neat sets of 3-1, like gold to victory point, because we got to tighten those scores somehow and make everybody feel like they were close to the end of the game, even though it was no contest at all. And these cliches can be.
I don't know if I agreed with that last thing there. I mean, maybe that's kind of a new idea to me, that that there is an attempt in these kinds of games to make things seem like they were closer than they were. That's a new idea. I just haven't considered that before. Do you agree? Brickroad says, do you agree that social games in your framework can benefit from strategic elements? Yes. Definitely. Also, toys can benefit from strategic elements. There's definitely an attempt to make things seem close in a lot of Euros. Maybe there is, and maybe I'm just like not thinking of it right. All games could benefit from strategic elements. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like, sure. Why not? Strategic elements are cool, Fuck it.
Be frustrating because I'm sure you've had the thought watching a romantic comedy that it would have been much better.
I'm not being sarcastic, by the way. I know I sounded sarcastic, but
she would just go on a road trip. But the song and dance of going through the building of an engine and its scoring it's circumscribing the possible expression. And again, and I'll say this several more times, this isn't to suggest that those games are wrong. I love both of these games, especially Race. And I think that they are worth designing, playing, and there's still a lot of room to explore there. But we shouldn't allow that kind of genre to dominate our larger thinking about games. Kingmaking, in this sense, offers an alternative type of storytelling. It allows designers and players to tap into a really long tradition of betrayal and manipulation that's as old as narrative itself, and it forms the foundation for a lot of media that we enjoy today, from The Bachelor to Game of Thrones. And there's no reason why we shouldn't play with those concepts.
Well, I have reasons, but he can't hear me, so.
When we talk about the engine builder, the primary sort of motif is construction. It's progressive. Well, I won't go into
to clarify. Like, I'm not saying we shouldn't make social games. I am just saying that to say a defensive Kingmaking, to say that implies that maybe it would be okay if a game like these two games did have Kingmaking, right? Like, I think really the title of how I would title his talk is in defense of social games, because that's really what he's defending. but that sounds way less like spicy, because he's not actually defending kingmaking in a game where it pisses people off and it feels bad and it doesn't, where people complain about kingmaking. That's the thing. In order to defend kingmaking, quote unquote, you have to actually defend it where it's attacked. People are not complaining about kingmaking in Cosmic Encounter, right? Because clearly Cosmic Encounter is a game that embraces kingmaking very explicitly. I don't have a problem with kingmaking in Cosmic Encounter. What you have to do is I have to think of can maybe somebody think of a game that that we know of that has a kingmaking problem, that's a strategy game, but that in Root, I can't speak to Root. I haven't played Root really. But it would be good if we could come up with an example of a game that's a strategy game and that people complain about the kingmaking, and then see if his response, Risk. Yeah. I mean, the thing with Risk is like, what are you really threatening? It's like very random. Any strategy game with politics, I don't know, multiplayer Civ or something. I don't really complain about kingmaking very much because most of the games that I play don't have any kingmaking. Any strategy game with any directed, I don't play free-for-all games. That's why I'm asking if anyone knows. Give me some examples. Directed zero-sum interaction. All the games I play don't have that because that would be dumb to have in a strategy game. But I'm sure they exist. Any game that's free for all, yeah. So StarCraft, maybe. But serious people who play StarCraft seriously don't play FFA because it's kind of dumb. Who you trade with in Settlers, yeah, that's a pretty good. Yeah. Even Euro games have some ability to target. Yeah, some ability. Yeah, that's true. A game I like, but it may, is Bonanza, but that is again, I kind of think it's a social game. Yeah. It's something that for me, as someone who really likes the other kind of not social strategy games, one of the things that makes me I'll play Bonanza, a certain amount. I'll put a limit on my amount of Bonanza playing is for me the fact that someone can just be that player, he's not winning this game. Everyone, don't trade with him, and then it's game. That player just can't play. Let's see. Can you think of a multiplayer game with no ability to target? Well, not no ability to target. I don't know. I'm trying to think of multiplayer games that I play. If you define all games that have kingmaking as a social game instead of a strategy game, there are no strategy games. No, I'm not saying that. Well, I don't know. It depends on how you define kingmaking, I was going to say Agricola or Puerto Rico or something. So Puerto Rico a little bit has it, has an ability to affect certain players. Puerto Rico is a weird example because it has this, next player kind of thing where, Race for the Galaxy, Civilization is a good example. I think, Race for the Galaxy does have a multiplayer, version. It's not nearly as good as one-on-one. That's the thing too, is a lot of these games, if you really wanted to seriously play them, you would probably play them one-on-one. And a big reason for that is that there wouldn't be this weird free-for-all sort of thing. RFTG has it too. You cannot pick the things that they need. Yes, for sure. It does have that. But I guess I always feel that's this weird thing that occasionally happens and comes in those games. Those games, to me, Euro games, a lot of them are fundamentally, they feel like one-player games. And then all of a sudden, once in a while, one of your resources just disappears. You're playing Agricola and you have this little thing going on. It's oh, the wood just disappeared. What the heck? Most players don't want to play one-on-one in my experience. Yeah. Well, I think social games will probably be more popular than just like serious strategy games, for a lot of reasons. They are one-player games just in parallel. Yeah, they're like parallel one-player games, which occasionally you can just like, I'm gonna take your wood, and then it's like, oh, what the hell happened to the wood? Yeah, yeah, I gotta think. I'm trying to remember some of the train games. I used to play a lot of these like train games. Like I think I have Chicago Express up there. He just mentioned Chicago Express. It's right up there on my wall, the blue game. It's right here. Bing, 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 bing. That one is a cool game. That might be a good example here because it's a really systemic game, like most of those train games. Very mathy, very cutthroat. And absolutely, I think, now I'm trying to remember all the rules, but I think it would be very much a king-making kind of game. I also sort of wonder if within some of these genres, like the train game genre, games like Age of Steam and stuff, within that genre, I feel like there's this aesthetic of like hyper systemic meritocratic sort of stuff where even if king-making were possible, that the players just wouldn't do it. The kinds of players who would play such games would be like, no, we don't king-make. We just play to do our best and like play optimally. I wonder if that's like a dynamic that happens there, which actually, interestingly enough, is so like not king-making in a game that could allow it is also like a social dynamic that's kind of interesting. But yeah, anyways, rant over.
History, because I'll bore you guys all to death. But what Kingmaking offers us is perhaps the most powerful narrative tool that any writer has ever used, which is to say it allows you to use irony. It allows you to tell a story of revenge.
I like that. Not king-making is also just king-making for whoever is ahead. Well, kind of, but if there is a agreement, like we could play some game, like the four of us in this chat room or whatever, we could play some game and be like, okay, well, we're all gonna not king-make. No matter what happens, we all agree that one of the rules, like a soft rule that we're putting on ourselves, is that none of us will king-make no matter what. That we will all play for ourselves and try to do the best that we can for ourselves and not do something that is, that's kind of maybe a little bit hard to enforce, but like we will all come to this with the spirit of not trying to choose who wins the game, but rather just trying to do the best for ourselves. Depends if the games are winner take all or if there are rewards lower down.
And redemption without worrying that everyone's going to feel that they were fairly treated. It just opens up the kind of stories that you can tell. Now, a quick sidebar to note that one space in games that has been really exploring this area is the single-session RPG. There's a lot of interesting...
The crouch mode has a highlighted message, which I am legally bound to read aloud. I'd make it my goal to king-make as discreetly as possible. I think that's supposed to be as discreetly as possible. Okay. Well... That's yeah, you would do that. But that would be cheating because you agreed not to do that. So you are a cheater and you're lucky that you don't live in those times where they would do really bad things to the cheating players. Part of Kingmaking 2 is that you realize you are in a position where you cannot win anymore. And now all you can do is affect other players' win chance. Yes, and so there is another problem there with king-making is that there's a lame duck kind of scenario, right? Which we haven't even talked about yet. Like, if a game is such that once people... I'm generally, like, to me, my point of view is that like 3 players or more is a complete non-starter for a strategy game. And one of the reasons for that is no player should ever be in a place where they can't win and that the game is continuing to go on. So that's one of the reasons why I feel that way. My position is 1 player is optimal and the best. 2 players can be okay. And then any larger number than that, and it would be fine for a social game or a cooperative game that's like largely basically a one-player game played by committee, that kind of stuff. But yeah, lame duck is a big thing. I wonder if he'll talk about that in this talk.
What's happening with independent RPG makers that it's well worth viewing, and even if playing D&D makes you self-conscious or uncomfortable, you should buy some of the books I'm going to mention here in a second, because they are very, very interesting just from their formal perspective. And here I'm thinking about Avery Adler's The Quiet Year and all of the rest of the games she's produced, and a game by a company called Thorny Games called Dialect. These are games that really upset what you might think is even possible in the space of a game, and even if you don't play them, the rules are powerful enough. Okay, so if we are going to build games about kingmaking, we need a different framework. We can't use fairness as the bedrock to build our design practice on. We have to find something else. So what do we find? Well, some people would jump to this gentleman over here, Rainier Knizia, who has made a few games. And he has this quote that you will see like tacked onto profiles, and I'll read it here. When playing a game, the goal is to win, but it is the goal that is important, not the winning. This is a little bit like the old canard about the destination, or the journey being more important than the destination, and it's fine. The main problem with it is it's relentlessly individualistic. It's about your personal experience of encountering the game, which I think, while that's a nice thought, it doesn't get into what makes something like kingmaking so difficult, which is to say that my personal journey is going to intersect with yours, and one of us is going to rob the other and continue the journey. So in sort of searching for a new framework, I found myself reaching for Bernie DeKoven's amazing 1978 book, The Well-Played Game, which I think is just an unbelievable text, and one that anybody...
And by player, we mean opposing sides. Yeah, teams are basically a one player by committee. Yeah. So 2x2, 2-on-2 is basically a 1-on-1, that kind of thing. Yeah. So here, when he's like addressing the Reiner Knizia thing, it would be really helpful if because basically Reiner works in my sort of like way of thinking about games. He's trying to make strategy games sort of proper in the way that I mean it. And so the statement that he makes is a canard because that's what's kind of funny too here, is that like there's, it's like, there's always like this we should have more types of experiences and open things up and stuff, except not the thing, like not, like something's still being excluded kind of. And I know that he's sort of reacting to kingmaking as this sort of dominant, there's a dominance to the whole strategy game thing, and Reiner Knizia is a very prolific game designer and stuff, but my point is just that it is valid to have a philosophy like this, and it is also valid to have a sort of social game philosophy. And they are different philosophies, and they are different, aesthetics, and they're both good in their own way, I think.
Interested in design should check out. And in Bernie DeKoven's book, he has this really wonderful distinction he makes between playing to win and having to win. And there's a way that this could be described simply as like another version of what Knizia is talking about, but for DeKoven, it has nothing to do with individual experience. Basically, when you play to win, you must win. Okay, cool. Everyone's always playing to win. But when you have to win, you must win because you are unsure of your own position in the community of players, and only by winning can you kind of prove yourself in that position. So basically, if you think about all of the theory around the magic circle and the exceptional space of the game, what DeKoven is talking about is, if you don't close that circle entirely and you bring in some of the outside world into your game, you're going to get people who are going to try to use the game as a way to manipulate the world outside of the game, and that's where all the bad feelings come from. So he has a short note on this, and I'm just going to, I didn't put this up, but I think for those of you who are interested in DeKoven's work, it can all be pretty much summed up in this kind of short little snippet. He describes games in this way. This is a quote. We were each willing to play the particular game. We were willing to play with each other, and we arrived at the well-played game because of the way we combined with the game. Now, that's a little like woo-woo by today's standards, and know that if you do buy a copy of The Well-Played Game, an excellent book, it's entirely like that. It's like a giant stream of consciousness exploration of play. But I think what is so powerful about DeKoven's idea is to back out from the individual instance of the game and to really reassert the power of play as the thing that the game is allowing you to do. The game is the medium that allows players to interact with each other, and if you are having the perfect experience of play, the victory is putting everybody on the same page, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that is keeping them there. So, thinking about Dekoven as a foundation for Kingmaking, I want to talk a little bit about some takeaways. What are some things that we can do with this alternate framework, a framework that doesn't overly emphasize fairness? Well, I think that I have a kind of set of rules that I think about when I'm working on design, especially the design that I know is going to feature a lot of Kingmaking. The first rule is that, as in all things, consent is absolutely critical. You do not want to misdirect your players. It's really important that everybody realizes what kind of game they're going to play.
So why'd you put cute art on the game where you can like backstab each other and ruin everything for each other? Anyway, let's see. I kind of made this. I have sympathy for this because I feel like Oro actually is a good example of like, it looks a certain way. It looks like this like little cute Disney RPG kind of thing, and then you play it and it's like the most like tactical, you know, like don't fuck up, like kind of thing ever. Anyway, go on.
Coven has an interesting chapter in the Well Played Game where he talks about something called the dangerous game.
Grimdark Oro.
He notes in this chapter that
would be well. That's the thing. Like, you know, yeah, it would actually read better. It would actually like communicate itself probably better. And I am very thankful for Advance Wars because I think Advance Wars, maybe we will see, allowed a cheat path in for my, you know, the kind of game I want to make into cuteness. I know his take on that. It softens the blow of the bad feelings, allows you to take things less seriously. I think that's kind of valid. But I also think that there's the question of like, what do people expect when they see the game? They see the box, they hear the name of the game, and what are they consenting to? You know, like I have this one game, Cutthroat Caverns, and the box is black, and it looks scary. And I feel like that does a pretty good job of communicating between the name and the thing. With a game of woodland might and right. Yeah, that does help, yeah. Drowning Monsters is pretty grimdark. Advance Wars is a pioneer for us all. It's like the worst way to kill. Yeah.
Not involve people who haven't accepted the threat or haven't chosen to play the dangerous game. Now, this is a really interesting kind of two-tiered view of this. It's a little bit like watching a horror movie. You obviously would never want to watch a horror movie with somebody who hates horror movies. And so that's obviously bad. But what is less obviously bad, but what is still bad, is watching a horror movie where half the people like watching it because they think it's funny, and the other half the people like watching it because they think it's scary. Each of those, that heterogeneity in that viewing base really can hurt an experience. And so for Dekoven, it's important, if you want to play a dangerous game, to agree to play it, but then also to accept the danger.
I just had a thought when he was talking about half of the people in the room are watching the horror movie because they think it's funny, and half of the people in the room are watching it because they think it's scary. I think that's a cool construct that can, you know, reveal a lot. But Kingmaking games, when people complain about Kingmaking, again, this is where we should be addressing the complaint. What people are complaining about is, I was playing this game to pursue mastery within the system, right? And then these other players were playing to kind of fuck around and, just like make the worst player win. You have to be all on the same page, right? But the issue is that with Kingmaking games which get complained about for their Kingmaking issue, this is one of the problems. And I guess I haven't played Root. Maybe Root doesn't have that problem. Tribound, I actually like that half funny, half serious, scared composition of people. Yeah, I mean, you don't have to have everyone be on the exact same page. And in fact, I would argue you rarely do have, if you have a group of like 6 or 7 people watching a movie, you're going to have different people having different things that they want, and different things that they hate about it and love about it. And, that's one of the reasons that one player is the best, because you can find the system that has the thing that you're looking for. I mean, I shouldn't say it's the best. I think that some of that noise, that social difference, is actually really good in that it forces you to be like, oh, I have to like encounter that, like this horror movie that I thought was so scary. Now I'm seeing my friend laugh at it, and that's like challenging my way of understanding it. And I think that that's all very important. But people don't complain about that in horror movies. Like that's not a problem with horror movies exactly. I don't think. Maybe it is. His horror movie example makes me think of Midsummer, which was equally so ridiculous you had to laugh and super unsettling and grim. My thought there is that staying on the same page would have been limiting in a negative way, I think. Yeah, maybe. I haven't seen the movie.
You should be honest about it. Now, it's also important to realize that if you are designing a game about kingmaking, that the relationships between the players, that's everything. Mechanisms do not matter so much as the relationships to the player, and this is a very easy thing to forget when you're working in design. What will happen sometimes is...
That was an overly broad statement that he made, I think, because that's one of those things where he's saying all games are social games. And that's not true. That's like just not true. Like, you know, sometimes it is just all about the system, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to make systemic games that don't have social dynamics. Brickroad says, right, so if you're playing a multiplayer strategy game, maybe somebody's challenging your understanding of it if they boop you. And actually with Midsummer, a lot of people complained that they were laughing at the climax of a horror movie, which seems like a problem of labels and not what the movie was. Labels and expectations, yeah. In games that have kingmaking. Okay, if he had said in games that have kingmaking, sure. Except that there are a lot of games, you know, it's like which games have kingmaking, quote unquote. There are a lot of games that people are dissatisfied with, you know, the kingmaking in them because of the kingmaking, and they just want the game without the kingmaking. And that's a reasonable thing to want. That's kind of what I'm saying.
When the relationships between the players are not highlighted, the interactions, the kingmaking...
Whereas it sounds like he's saying if a game ever has kingmaking, the answer is always to dive into the kingmaking. Whereas I don't think that's true. I think sometimes the answer is to remove the kingmaking, which may mean making it a two-player game, which may mean really drastic changes sometimes. But that might be the right call sometimes. That's all I'm saying.
Interaction in the last stage of the game can feel like a cruel joke. If I've been hoarding stone the entire game so I can upgrade my clay house, and you take it from me in the last turn despite never touching me the entire game, it's not going to feel like an ironic coup or something worth thinking about. It's just going to feel like a bad joke. And this, I think, brings me to Risk, which I think is still just a brilliant and wonderful game. Maybe more fun to think about than to play. But one of the real tricks of Risk is that there's no negative space on the board. So what kind of game are you playing when you play Risk? Well, it's a game where you're going to hurt each other, and there's no way to get around it. I often wonder, a lot of sort of Space 4X games have this problem where the first third of the game is very quiet and like it's about synergies and building up. And then in the second half, you tear down all the work you did in the first half. And it usually makes people feel rotten. And I think if the board started full, you would get around this problem. This is one reason, by the way, like in Root, the board starts completely full. And the primary aggressor in the game, the faction called the Eerie Dynasties, they're playing a program game where they are literally having to program in attacks so that they have sort of deniability. They're like, I didn't mean to attack you. It's just that's what I promised I would do for the rest of the game. Another note about this is another interesting line about like that kind of thematic and mechanical cohesion is a comparison between something like Inish and Blood Rage. So these are both like, if you look at just the boxes and the pieces, you're like, oh yeah, there's some war happening in these boxes. In Inish, you fight all the time. Oh, it's a fighting game. It's a very fighting game. But Blood Rage is really more of like a drafting game. It's like much closer to Sushi Go than it is to Risk. And that isn't to denigrate Blood Rage. I think Eric Lang's brilliant, and he did a good job with it. But it can create weird moments because there are times when like you thought you were playing a drafting game, but then it slides into being a little bit of a war game, and it feels like not at ease with itself. Whereas in Inish, you're playing a drafting game, but the drafting game is entirely about action denial and about fighting. So the third thing I think is very important is to give players diplomatic flexibility. There aren't villains in real life. We have partners and we have adversaries, and sometimes our partners become our adversaries, and sometimes we need to find partners in those who oppose us. No diplomacy system you design is going to be as clever as your players. So you want to try to give them the most creative framework that they could possibly exist in. I think this is one reason why turn-based strategy games, especially on the digital side, really struggle with their diplomacy systems. It's just hard to create the sort of freewheeling deal-making that you see in a game like diplomacy in a digital space. The last takeaway is, I think, the most complicated one, and it's the one that I'm the most unsure of personally, and this has to do with the management of hope and of victory. So victory conditions, I think, are the most critical element of any game design. In my own practice, they are the very first thing that I that I put to page, and they are the last thing.
I'm bitter because I just came off a Risk game on Thursday where I got Kingmaking bashed. That's rough. That's rough. Yeah, although arguably, I mean, that's... If there weren't Kingmaking in Risk, you know, like what else, what would there be? What even else is there? Yeah, it's hard to imagine a no Kingmaking. I guess a one-on-one Risk would have no Kingmaking. Yeah, just dice rolls. Dice rolling contest.
Thing that I ever want to tamper with. The victory conditions put everybody together. They're like the script. Even more than the rest of the rules, the victory conditions bind the players together. But you run into a problem once another player can't win. And here I often think of Martin Wallace's 2000.
No, the problem is you don't run into a problem when a player can't win. That is a problem. Or you know, when a player can't, whether the player cannot win and the game is continuing on.
Game Liberté. One of the things that's great about Wallace titles is I feel like he must design very quickly because he doesn't cover his tracks. You can sort of see all of the development in the game just by looking at the final game. And so Liberté is a game about the French Revolution. It's an election game. But the way the math of the elections works out, certain factions, certain players are always going to be like way ahead. Like after the first election, a couple players are going to win like 8 points, and then you can even see it in the screenshot actually. Like those 2 people did very well, and everyone else is just dead last. And this will always happen. This isn't like bad play. And in fact, in the next election, those people who are ahead, they're going to get more ahead, right? And the way Wallace dealt with this, instead of fixing the kind of core math problem that was producing this result, is he created 2 alternate victory conditions, misery conditions are what they're actually called, whereby the players who are losing can kind of flip the table over, and they have totally different ways of winning that are so dangerous you would never do it unless there was no chance you were going to win by points. And what this does is even until the very, very last moment, all players remain kind of in the game. Now, this to me is a very good idea, and I like it, and I build alternate victory conditions into almost every game that I've worked on. But I wonder...
I don't think alternate victory conditions are good. I'm anti-alternate victory conditions in serious strategy games. In social games, go nuts. Absolutely. Definitely. But in serious strategy games, I think that, you know, you have to have like a core mechanism that's like got supporting mechanisms, and those are geared towards a goal. And when you have multiple distinct victory conditions, and maybe this is probably something we can have a whole day on, but multiple distinct victory conditions always leads to the same problems, which is you know, everything in a game has to be sort of like tuned to a victory condition, a win, like something that causes a win. And when you have multiple of those, it's impossible to balance everything. It just becomes like this weird, I don't know, like the funneling system. There's a funneling that happens towards a goal, and when you have other goals, it's like you get these weird, awkward overlaying funnels that kind of just kind of ruin the game. I have to like flesh out what I'm saying. I'm not making a good case for it right now, but I'm definitely anti multiple win conditions in a serious strategy game, but I'm not anti that at all in social games. Although I'm not really anti, honestly, a lot when it comes to social games. I think they're somewhat more flexible. This isn't like Civ where you're just picking one to go for, but rather additional pressure from an alternate condition. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. There's a thing that you additional pressure from an. I'm not sure how. What do you mean? The Crouch Mode says this isn't like Civ where you're just picking one to go for, but rather additional pressure from an alternate condition, which I think is a lot more workable for a strategy game. I don't understand the distinction between what he's describing and the Civ victory conditions. Because, yeah, I don't see the difference. Anyway, let's keep going.
Here too, if there's another way of thinking about victory that isn't so straitjacketed, and here I have to think about the games of Phil Eklund, because the thing about Phil Eklund's games, they're immensely complicated and goofy, and they're extremely random and mean. So this is a shot from High Frontier. If you can believe it, this is like 1/20th of what the board looks like, and it is that complicated all the way through. And in High Frontier, I once spent an hour planning a mission to one of Jupiter's moons, and then the mission was about halfway through, and I hit a radiation belt wrong, and one of my spaceship components blew up, and I spent the next hour, like hour of game time, attempting to rescue my poor astronauts who were drifting to one Lagrange point or another. And it was great. And there's this amazing thing about Eklund's games where the story that the game is telling is so bracing, is so powerful, that even when you're out of contention for victory, you don't want to unplug. You don't want to unimmerse yourself. And this is what usually happens. And if the victory condition is the only thing that is immersing your players, then you need to create a system where the players always have a chance to win. But if the other storytelling techniques are giving them something, then the victory condition starts to be a little less important.
Also true.
So I want to close with a short quota, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions, which is to talk a little bit about video games, since this is primarily a video game design conference. So one of the funny things is that the space that I work in design, these multilateral conflict games, video games are really bad at them, like horrible. Like if you've ever played a game of StarCraft in the free-for-all mode, I'm just sorry. Because the games just aren't designed for it. I mean, even multiplayer competitive games, if you think about like something like Dota or any of the other MOBAs, I mean, or Counter-Strike, these are 5v5s, these are team sports. In terms of the actual like game theory, we're talking about formally two-player games, even if they have multiple humans involved. Or
that's what I
cooperative
said.
experiences, something like Overcooked. Games just really aren't, digital games, they have a hard time with the free-for-all game, with the exception of something that's happened in the past couple years, which is to say the rise of the Battle Royale. I think that these are the most important games.
I mean, okay, so what he has to prove to me is how these are meaningfully different from Quake Deathmatch from 1997 or whatever. Quake 1 Deathmatch. We'll find out.
That have been developed since Minecraft, and probably even maybe more important because they are truly multilateral conflict games. And even if you hate them, if you've played them, you probably have memories from the games you have played. You've played games where you've randomly died, and then the rest of your squad has attempted to avenge you as they hunted your killer over the battlefield. And you watched them with rapt attention because even though your character was dead, you were still in the game. They have amazing storytelling capacity. When we talk about open world games, we usually are not talking about open worlds so much as a very full world where every nook and cranny of a setting has like all these little side plots and branching narratives in it. For my money, the Battle Royale games are the only true open world games out there because it's really emergent what can happen. You have no idea the kind of story that each match is going to tell, outside of the fact that you need to spend your first 10 minutes feverishly looting before you get shot. And I've been talking mostly about storytelling and not so much like mechanisms and strategy, although we can go into that in the Q&A if you'd like. But one thing I will say is these games also produce really interesting strategic concerns. If you are on a hill watching the last two squads, or maybe the last two squads fight and exhaust themselves, you might want to intervene and get that loot. But if you fire your weapons, you might telegraph your position to those squads or to another squad that might be watching you.
No More Bird says, I have a decent idea of the story every Battle Royale match is going to tell. Yeah, that's true. They're pretty popular to watch on Twitch. That's true. Yeah.
There are all these concerns about position and exposure and supply. These are really interesting strategic concerns that are only made possible because we're dealing with a multilateral conflict. So in short, I think that by looking at games which are about kingmaking and which really frankly address problems of multiplayer and rather address problems of the multilateral design, let me start that over. So in short, what I'm trying to say is basically designs that feature high player interaction, that feature multilateral conflict, I think they've got big storytelling payoffs that are worth investigating, and I also think that they also have big strategic payoffs. And there's a whole world of different sorts of designs that we just sort of need to explore, but part of that is realizing our own assumptions about the kind of games that we value and deciding whether or not we might want to challenge some of those assumptions. All right, thank you guys.
Yeah, I think that end part was probably the weakest part, like the least developed, because I don't like, is it because there's teams, like there's squads, or is it because it's really big? Like he just didn't go into like what he was getting at with why those Battle Royale games are so meaningfully distinct from, Quake or even like StarCraft. Like why I mean, I don't know. I think actually, if he was talking those games up so much, I actually think he was being a little bit unfair to StarCraft. My memories of playing StarCraft FFA, which I did a lot back in the day, I remember I would scout around and I'd see like, oh, these two people are at war. I should wait until after they do their war and I can like blah, blah, blah. Like there were, you could put a bunch of dudes in a box, and as long as the box is big enough and there's enough like shit to do, they're gonna generate stories because like that's what people do, you know. I think that on some level, a lot of tabletop role playing that's more loose and freeform has similar qualities. How big the battle royale box is, sure, but I mean, if you play StarCraft FFA with like 8 players, I used to do that. I used to play on these huge StarCraft 1 maps with 8 players, and you'd be scouting around, and there would be like dynamics that would be happening, and like, oh, one person got almost completely wiped off the map, and he's just going off and hiding off in some corner with like a barracks and like one command center, and and then like some other person like took over and completely conquered another person, and now they're really huge, and so now there's like this, not an alliance exactly, but like 2 or 3 other players all realize like, oh my god, that guy is like completely dominating, and so maybe they all soft go after him, whatever. I think that he was underselling StarCraft FFA and maybe overselling these battle royale games. But yeah, and I mean, a bigger take is like what you're saying now, Danista. His point is how big the BR box is, but he didn't actually say that. But that would have been like something that's like, if you and really, it's not so much the bigness, but it's actually the time. The fact that you just, one of the issues I think with real-time video games is that there isn't enough time to contemplate these kinds of dynamics, and the battle royale gives players a little bit more time to actually think like, oh, should I go over there? Whereas, compared to Quake 1 Deathmatch, it's like everything's just happening so fast. Or if like you were to play free for all in, do you remember the StarCraft 1 map? I think it was called Bloodbath. It was a very small map with just like one. It was like 4. It was kind of like mini micro hunters. But like something like that, there isn't much room for that kind of stuff. Yeah, Bloodbath. Battle Royale games solve the Kingmaker problem by not letting players communicate. Oh yeah, I mean that's right. That's part of it too. The Battle Royale dynamic is that it's harder to get into a position to directly affect people. What he's sort of getting at is letting players interact when they're at a radically... the Crouch Mode says, what he's sort of getting at is letting players interact when they're at radically different stages at what they're trying to accomplish in the system. Okay. EY Priest, I loved Bloodbath. Smaller maps work better on my 14K modem. It's just actor removal compared to FFA FPS where you're sort of parallel. Right, yeah. Well, yeah, Battle Royale games actually have state beyond just like how much health you have. You can actually like gain stuff. It's kind of sad that that's like this achievement, but that's where we are. In StarCraft, if you're in if Dadnisa says, in StarCraft, if you're in an FFA, you can do the quick Kingmaker type thing and swoop in on a fight. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, StarCraft is maybe a good example of, like, to the extent that if we assume that StarCraft is, like, a valuable, good thing to have in the first place, 3-player StarCraft is actually a situation where someone might complain reasonably about FFA, and I don't think that his talk responds to that complaint. His talk should have been called In Defense of Social Games. And or like social games are good. And actually I think that he really, the true honest title of this talk should be Social Games Are Better Than Non-Social Games. Because I think that there was many times throughout the talk that he sort of said things that like suggested that he just thinks that they're better. Which is fine. Like I think strategy games are better than social games. Or I don't know if I really think that, but like I definitely have a bias towards strategy games. That's what I want personally. I agree. Everything has its place, Sure, in your position over time matters more because you can't traverse the whole map super fast. More like social games are valuable. Yeah, but I mean, as the crouch mode says, no one would watch that, right? Because it's like, and that's the thing is like, and this is, I mean, this is how you name things. I actually just did this the other day, and I wrote the article. What was it? I had a bit of a clickbaity kind of article title. It was about cooperative games. Oh, the quarterbacking problem isn't real or something like that. And that's a little bit clickbaity, I think. Something along those lines. And I think, yeah, that's we're sort of all pushed to incentivize. And in fact, I did. I got the most engagement on that article I've gotten in years on anything. So yeah, if you want engagement from people, often in the form of them calling you a fucking idiot, then you got to clickbait. But yes, the real important thing here is not the clickbaity title, but the fact that he doesn't respond to the actual times when people would complain about kingmaking, which were situations like, I mean, we were just talking about StarCraft. If somebody likes StarCraft and they think it's good as a strategy game, like they play it one-on-one all the time, and then they play a 3-player version, and they get kingmaked against, even though they were like winning and they were doing StarCraft better than everyone else. That seems to me to be a valid complaint, and a situation where kingmaking kind of sucks, and it's why I don't want to really play. I mean, I don't want to play any StarCraft, but if I wanted to play StarCraft, I would want to play one-on-one StarCraft or perhaps 2-on-2 because of the kingmaking thing. Well, he's a board game guy mostly, so what he's responding to is probably different from your experiences. Well, yeah, I still think we need to come up with the examples of where people complain about kingmaking in board games. I think that would be useful. In StarCraft, attacking someone is kingmaking because you're hurting yourself. Well, in a 3-player StarCraft. Not one-on-one StarCraft. Yeah. I'm going to take a very quick break. And then we can... we could play someone's game. Or we could continue talking about this stuff. Up to y'all. Oh, there is this second thing here that I wanted to read also. Do I want to read this? I don't know. I don't know if I want to read this now. This was sold to me as the second part of this talk, but it doesn't actually look like. It looks like it's just talking about some specific game. If I had to play StarCraft, I'd only play 32-player FFA. Well, I mean, yeah, and there's like a value there too of like, if a game is kind of crappy, like I actually would rather play the social version of it, because then I can just have like some silly shit happen and like sort of troll and like find ways to entertain myself. In 32-player StarCraft, that does sound better to me than one-on-one StarCraft, because I don't like StarCraft. And so I wonder to some extent, how much of social games and the desire for social games is coming from a skepticism about how good strategy games could be. I'll leave you with that thought while I quickly run out. I'll be right back in a moment. All right. Cyclades. Oh, yeah. Oh, you know what's another one maybe? I want to fix my thing here. Another game I could imagine people complaining about that stuff would be maybe, what was that game? It was really popular like 10 years ago or something. Small World or one of those kind of things. Cyclades, I think, if I recall correctly, was a little bit like Small World. Yeah, a lot of those games that have like kind of like a map. I could definitely see that. So, this is awkward. What's awkward? Dudes on a map games. Yeah. It'd be interesting to think about why those specifically. Oh, the quiet stream. Sorry. Yeah, I could put on some music. We could also just hit up one of these other things that we wanted to talk about. This has been talked about now. We can delete that, I guess. Or is there like a completed? There isn't. So let's just delete it. Let's see. Free for all. Well, this is actually basically the same. This is the same topic, right? We already talked about free for all. That's basically all we were talking about. And then team games. Team games is an interesting one that's sort of related. Chaos in the Old World. Although that was actually, I would say that's kind of like a social game. The Game Design Book Club. We're going to play Noita, I think. That'll be kind of interesting to try out. Yeah, but free for all, I mean, we kind of already talked about this. Like, we can talk about this again at some point. Let's maybe make another part that's like later. Yeah. Forcing people to Kingmake in FFA games helps these games. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I would say is like if you're making an FFA game, you may as well really lean into, and that's sort of, I think that's the good interpretation of Cohle Wehrle's talk. Is yeah, you know, yeah. Have you ever talked about the design goals and high level goals for Gem Wizards Tactics? That's a good question. We could do that. If people would be interested in that, I could definitely do that. And it's good for me too, because like a lot of times, you know, you find yourself working on something. It's just good to like sort of, you know, mission statement yourself. Let's see here. Let me see if I can find the, because I think in the original design document, yeah, in the original design document, I usually have like a sort of statement of purpose kind of thing. But maybe I deleted it because I've already been working on it so much. I also did write a couple of articles about this. So actually, yeah. Yeah. In this, so I mean, you know, one of like let's just make a new Google Doc. Let's do this from scratch. But this is one of the articles I wrote about the game. Oh man, look how much it's kind of come along since this time. It looks so much better now. Part of it's because this is screwing up the stuff, but yeah, some really specific problems with turn-based tactics games. Advance Wars maybe being the most famous of which, XCOM, those kinds of games. Yeah, why GWT? Okay. This is good. This is fun. This feels different from the other thing, but also reasonable to do. I like turn-based tactics games, but hate many of their properties. I want to make a good version of games like Advance Wars, XCOM. This can be like a hyperlink to that article. And I want to make a good version of these games, etc. I mean, yeah, that's a big one, and we can have a sub points on that. But I mean, basically, you can look at this article. I'll post it in the chat. What do I like about them? Yeah, because there's a lot baked in. That's a really good question. I mean, stepping back further, what I want is to make, I want to make great single player strategy games, right? And we talk all the time about why that is. What I like about strategy games, we've talked a lot about that, and why I want to make single player games. So why turn-based tactics? Because I'm kind of coming at it from like the roguelike tradition. I made 100 Rogues and I made Oro and these single actor sort of games. And one of the things that I like about turn-based tactics games, what is good about turn-based tactics, design patterns. So here's the things that are good about them. Reasonably large map that allows for medium and long arcs in a kind of natural or visible medium or way, I guess maybe you could say. Let me make this a little bit bigger on the thing here. There you go. Examples would be moving a unit across the map, capturing a part of the map, changing the terrain. Well, yeah. The terrain. See, next point. The things like tile types, movement costs, things like adjacency, bonuses, flanking, zone of control, a whole kit of already developed spatial meaning. Also, I want to add, create, let's see, how do I word this? Give detail to detail and room for building meaning into the terrain and positions, right? So like if you're like your people are right up against I'm gonna use EG now. See, look at that, I'm learning. EG, a bunch of my troops are positioned against a river and have to cross it at high vulnerability, etc. So that's like a game state that contains all this meaning in it. Actually, the first thing I would say is it is a known sort of like kit of design patterns within strategy games. So that's alone one of the reasons. I mean, there's not that many of those, right? There's only an X amount of like known genres, people call them, kit of like a bunch of design. So for example, tile types, meaning different things in terms of like defense, movement costs, defense, etc. That kind of stuff is like, it kind of comes for free. People already know this stuff. Some of these things people already kind of know as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that's like free information, as well as things like health and things like that. As things like health, etc. Another reason I want to do this is can use the experience of Oro can sort of like build off of the experience of Oro, right? Because is it a very niche genre? I mean, I don't know. Advance Wars seems pretty popular. Fire Emblem seems pretty popular. Granted, Fire Emblem has a lot of other things going on, but if someone had played Fire Emblem and they saw this, you know, they've interacted with these rules before, like rules like this before. They understand like, oh, okay, yeah, it's like a grid, it's turn-based, I'm moving units around. Even if that's not what they like about Fire Emblem. And, you know, XCOM has, a lot of people play XCOM, a lot of people play Civ, arguably, is in the same. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to be marketing to strategy game players. Is that a niche? Probably, compared to like shooters or MMOs, and probably not compared to some other things. But yes, I think that probably if I was coming at this from like a business first perspective, I would not probably choose to make this. But that's not what's driving me. Build off of experience of Oro. Yeah. In terms of tactical abilities, emergent complexity, modifying terrain, etc. I actually want to do emergence. I just want this word to be like, or like emergent complexity. It is criminal how little emergent complexity there is in XCOM or Advance Wars. Like in these games, like pretty much all you can do is move and shoot. Like once in a while you'll have an ability of some kind in XCOM. But for the most part, you just move and shoot and be the first to shoot. That's pretty much the game. And that's something I really think it's just like such a lost opportunity. I also wanted to add like probably a kind of bad reason. Or like, antisocial reason or something is it's kind of fun in a an evil way to just blow up a bunch of troops in a war simulation. I mean, like I feel like it would be hard for me to deny that a lifetime of being aestheticized towards this, that I have been affected by a lifetime of being, towards this kind of fun, right? I think that's a thing. And it's something that I think about a lot for it. Like what do I think is fun? And, I come from this background of like Counter-Strike and shooting games and, 4X games and they're all war in one way or another. And so, the idea And yeah, I did a talk about this at Indiecade in 2017. The idea of like separating out strategy games and like concepts about like war and actor removal and killing and all that stuff. And it's hard because a lot of these things that are free information are also just like they're just tied into war, and you can like reskin them, and but then they start losing some of that free information. And they start losing this kind of evil, bad fun. So I do have sort of an answer to this, but it's not a complete answer. Incomplete, insufficient answer to this is the game is self-aware, silly, video gamey, cute, and I can try to be conscious of this at every step as much as I can. I think that's the best I can do. Because, like for game development, when you don't have a budget, when it's not a business first, the thing that the fuel that lets the engine go is enthusiasm. And this is the game that makes me excited to make this game. I mean, there's many games, but like all of my games that I've been excited that I've finished, Dragon Bridge, Oro, Empire, 100 Rogues, have all been on some level games of war or Mortal Kombat with a C, not with a K, and I would like to find ways to step outside that. I think I'm working on that. But this is right now, this is still just kind of like who I am on some level. And, yeah, I think this is kind of something I struggle with. Tribound says, we're going to need to use affordances, and combat-based gameplay gives us a lot of affordances too for you as a designer. That's true. Defense, hit points, attack, and whatnot is easy to understand because it's war-themed. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, well, I would say it's not easy to understand because it's war-themed, but it's easy to understand because we've, had... I don't believe the story that, like, violence is simpler or, like, easier to communicate for games. Like, I don't think that's really true. I think that violence and themes about war have this, like, laser connection to certain like power centers in our emotions. It's the same reason. Yeah, it's been done forever. It's been done in fiction, right? Like power fantasy. And there's like this like it's like it can like short circuit everything and just be like make you feel good kind of. It's like a drug like relationship, I guess. And so it is easy in that sense. And then on top of that, we get generations and generations and generations of just doing that over and over again, and it becomes like this universalized norm. And to the extent that doing anything outside of it is weird. But that is something that I do want to work on, and I want to challenge myself in this way in the future. And I think, I'm more interested in like cooperative games and one-player games and things like that. And this is the one thing that I want to work on more going forward. But yeah, basically this is, and then the other thing about it is, I really like the world, and expression of a certain kind of a particular vision of a fantasy world. And I think I've talked a little bit about this. Gem Wizards, a universe. Yeah, this might talk about it. Let's see. Oh, wait. Maybe that other thing did too. Hold on. Maybe this. The world. Factions. I don't think this talks about it exactly. But I'm very inspired by things like, Steven Universe and maybe Star Trek to some extent, or partially anti-inspired by Star Trek. Oh yeah, this was when I was making a 4X, Gem Wizards 4X, and Dragon Bridge is in this universe as well, and Gem Wizards theme. So yeah, this is a big thing. It's a lot of weird, stupid shit. Usually someone tells me, don't do that stupid thing. It's too stupid. Well, specifically, I'm anti-Star Trek in its race essentialism, which I think that almost all fantasy made before, like, I don't know, 2000, and a lot of fantasy these days still. All right, silliness that no one can stop me from doing, i.e. the potatoes, taking that silliness seriously, like some good politics, I guess I would say, like some actually good political concepts, such as being anti-race essentialism. So Star Trek is race essentialist in that, just like Tolkien or whatever. Tolkien is probably the best example because like orcs are just evil. They're just like these evil monsters that are just chaos monsters. And in Star Trek, it's a little bit less like silly, but it still has like the Klingons, who are like these warlike people that have this whole philosophy, or the what are the guys with the big ears, like Quark? Shit, I can't remember the name of them. Someone will say it in chat, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, there's Ferengi. Thank you. The Ferengi have this, and it's like, it's what I mean by race essentialism is it's sort of like communicated that this race, this species, or this, they use the term race, is fundamentally, they all believe this one thing, right? They all believe in, the Ferengi are all, they believe in like trade and like doing deals and scheming and stuff, and that's just who they are essentially. So you could counter that, and Gem Wizards universe does counter that by having it be. So what I've always wanted from Star Trek was, you have the Klingons, right? And they're all like these warlike, like they have all these like rituals that are all based in war, and they're all whatever. All you gotta do is just have like one Klingon come on screen and be like, oh, those guys, they're a bunch of like nuts. Like they're just the people that you see because they are, coming across the galaxy to do war. Like over, on this planet, like we have all these Klingons who are nothing like that. And that de-essentializes the philosophy from the race. And so that I have a lot of that. Like a lot of people, another thing is like sort of, I guess maybe having a lot of characters that are sort of against the things in their things. In Dragon Bridge, I explicitly have characters who almost do the opposite of represent what their faction is about. They resist. I know that Star Trek got better about this in like Deep Space Nine, and perhaps in other shows as well. I've only really watched TNG mostly so far, so even when they have like characters like Worf, who starts to like maybe soften his edges or whatever, the message is still. So there are good business demons, yes. Well, so the race is the demons, right? And what I call them in Gem Wizards Tactics is factions. And the business demons are a faction of the demons who have come up out of they've left the center of the earth where most demons live, And they're just like these super entrepreneurial demons who have this particular philosophy. Even within them, you're going to have a lot of like questioning and kind of like infighting and stuff. But most demons are not like that. Most demons, you know, have all their own, it's the same as human beings. That's the thing that also bothered me, is that like, you know, humans have all these factions and have all these like, oh, you're Irish, you're Scottish, you're blah, blah, blah. They have all this like, and then Klingons or whatever are just all Klingons. And they all just represent this one philosophy and this one almost personality, which is very, very race essentialist. Human's trait is versatility. Yeah. Well, and then, yeah, there's some other stuff there for sure. But, so yeah, this particular vision of a fantasy world, I think I can express something. I can just express something that's special and that's different. But is there a good demon faction? There could be. I would say that in the universe, yes. I don't know that in the playable game that you would necessarily be able to play as other demon factions, but yes. In fact, I've been thinking about what I should do with the main, pardon me, business demon character in Gem Wizard's Tactics. Vulcans have all these factions, but they look the same to us. I'm not sure what point that's making, actually. There's an ominous ellipse at the end of that statement, which makes me think that there's a therefore that's not being said. Okay. Yeah, so this is why I'm making this game. This is why I'm making Gem Wizard's Tactics. Yeah. I guess something I didn't really say was like a strategy game that you can live in and that I can live in as a designer. I mean, one of the things that I'm so excited about, and I'm really pumped that Oro is going to be coming back, because I've always wanted to like have this game that was like my game, and over the years it's being played and like I'm getting feedback and I'm like making changes to it and it's getting better and better and better and new features are being added. Like that to me just sounds like that's what I want in life, is that. And so I'm very excited about that. And this seems like a really good candidate for that. And I think, yeah, just thinking about like, I think that a lot of this stuff, the tactical stuff, I think there's just a lot more possibility for larger arcs here than there were in like roguelikes or the single actor units kind of games. And yeah, I think I sort of like rammed my head into the wall on that, working on Escape the Omnocronom. Omnocronom. Am I going to lose the ability to say Omnocronom over the years? So, yeah. And I also think that like the nice thing about this is, I mean, this can all be boiled down to, you know, it's similar to Advance Wars. It's similar to something that a lot of people really like. And that's, I think maybe there's like, maybe a kind of like maturity that I've gained over the years in making something that I like and that people like, rather than the approach with something like Omnocronom was starting from whole cloth, starting completely from scratch almost. It wasn't really, but it kind of was more. And sort of like, I'm going to make people get into this thing that I've created out of nothing. And this is more like working within a genre, and yeah, that's what I would say. I think this is pretty much all I have to say about Gem Wizard's Tactics, but let me know if you have any questions while I eat a Ritz cheese-flavored cracker. Other than that, I'm going to wrap it up. Oh, what are the design goals themselves? As in, like, what's going to be in the game? Like, I'm not sure I follow your question, but the design goals are make a deeper Advance Wars kind of game. Whatever targeting design, like a deeper, more emergent, turn-based tactical war game. High depth, definitely. I mean, reasonably high accessibility. If I'm being honest, probably high depth, medium, moderate, as high as possible accessibility. I think it'll be less accessible than Advance Wars. I just didn't want to get bogged down in Star Trek, but I agree with your goals for this game, both thematic and mechanic. Oh, cool. Thanks. High depth, moderate accessibility. Obviously we want high depth and high accessibility as much as possible. It's a matter of like how achievable are those things. And I think that it'll be hard to make this like super high accessibility. Who will GWT be for? GWT will be for turn-based strategy fans. Fans of games like XCOM, Advance Wars, perhaps Civilization, perhaps roguelikes, etc. That's who the game will be for. I don't know if that answers that question. And hopefully, I can bring more people into that in a way similar to what Advance Wars did. Right? So Advance Wars took this like old, stuffy, stodgy, historical genre of the war game and made it like super colorful, super cute, super simple, and it introduced a whole generation of people to this kind of game. And after that, there was this whole generation of people who like that kind of game now because they played Advance Wars. And I think that I want to do a similar thing. So, I mean, I don't know. That's the ambitious, but I would love to do that. I do care about the business aspect of it. Absolutely. But it isn't, it would be lying for me to say that it was the first priority, but it is definitely a priority. How will the single player levels look like? Varied goals, cutscenes in levels? Okay, so that's a good question. Let's see if I have the thing here. What did I last write down for this? One second here. Story stuff. Okay. So, I guess we can call this like metagame or something. Slash game modes. So there's the main game mode, ranked play, with a single player ELO system, which has very few narrative elements and is basically just gameplay. Okay, that's the main game mode that you can play endlessly. Then you will definitely have a story mode, story/tutorial mode. And I haven't completely worked out the details of this. We'll start out as a simple, movement, attacking abilities tutorial. Intersplice. This is nothing revolutionary. This is all pretty normal stuff with some story content. Eventually, by the end, looking a lot more like the main game mode and having some kind of story ending. The story involves the two factions. I haven't actually figured out exactly what I'm gonna do here yet. I haven't thought about this in a while, and so there's been some changes that I need to go back and revisit this. But the story is definitely going to involve the business demons, a war between the business demons and the potatoes. I had it before. You remember that at one point the game was called Business Demon Tactics. And at that point I had a whole sort of thing where I was going to try to make this game be all about kind of like aesthetically and the UI and how it was written to be all sort of from the perspective of the business demons. I've since backed off from that. And now I kind of think actually that the potatoes might be better. So you're sort of fighting a defensive war instead, and maybe the potatoes will be the ones sort of in the beginning of the tutorial. Let's see here what's being said in chat. But for the most part, I mean, single player, when you say single player levels, it's all randomly generated. There's except for there may be in this a few non-random levels. Let's see. The only non-random levels in the entire application. That would be it. Just like if there's like a thing where it's like, oh, I'm going to teach you how to like move your units around. Everything, that's the only time it'll be not random. Everything else is randomly generated. Putting more time in that story mode will go a long way. I agree with that. Yeah, no, I have to do that. I haven't. I've been just in like make this, you know, get it so that there is a game here first, and then I will go back and work on the story mode. But perhaps we're reaching the time where that's a good idea to start doing that. So the business demons, you know, thematically have come up out of the earth. Maybe I can have a cutscene where that happens. Advance Wars had many design levels. Well, the Advance Wars was all design levels. There was no random maps in Advance Wars. So yes, you're right. Advance Wars is also a multiplayer game, which currently there's no plans for this to be a multiplayer game. Although I think at some point, thinking about that would be cool. It's just, I don't think it's within my budget right now to like, and by budget, I mean my, you know, emotional or time or enthusiasm or just, man hours budget. I think that I'm very geared. I can see like the goal from here to completion in terms of making this a good single player game. Whereas multiplayer is like this whole nother fucking thing that I'm not prepared to think about at all. But I can see like, you know, at some point thinking about that. I think a big part of the ranked mode is about making the input randomness work, which is really hard. That's true. But designing levels for story mode, you have a lot more granular control. That's true. I wouldn't object to all of story mode being designed. That might be a good call. I'm fine with that. Also, colorful general commander characters. Yeah, we already have some of those. Let's see if I can pull some of them up. But you're going to play as Andromeda, I think, probably, for the... let's see, where's the... here we go. Oh, I don't have... yes, I do. 1 second. So I'll pull up the images here. Be in UI, character portraits. Yes. Yeah, so this guy... This is Agneth Sparrow. And he is the business demon leader, and he's got a couple of different poses. I could always make more of these. I made this pretty darn fast, actually. So I could make a few more of those. And then Andromeda will have some as well. I think Andromeda is a lot more charming, probably, than him. And he actually kind of looks more like a villain anyway, so it might actually work out better this way. Let's see if I can find a good picture of... illustrations. Characters. So this is the image of Andromeda from Gem Wizard's Tactics. I'm sorry, from Dragon Bridge. But so she's like a forest witch potato. And she, I think, probably will be the main character in the story that you play sort of as. I think that's probably the way to go. And then I will have one more mode. Custom mode, which is configure stuff however you want for a single battle. I think that's an important thing to have. And that's pretty much it for the initial release. Later on, I'd love to add more maps. I could imagine like a puzzle mode in this. I could imagine all kinds of different things. Yeah, there's all kinds of different modes we could eventually have, but this is the starting place where we start off. And in the main game mode, you have a campaign. I don't know if I've mentioned this, but you have a campaign of 10 missions starting at 50% land. And the win condition on the entire campaign is to end with at least 51% land. Yeah, and I might need to like work on that for this. The story mode might not need to not have that. I think it probably won't have that. Here's another big one. You actually lose sometimes in this war game. Imagine that. Because in XCOM or in what's it called, Fire Emblem, if you lose the battle, you just reload, right? Like you don't just keep going forward having suffered a loss. Like what? You lose sometimes? So this is a really weird video game where you can lose sometimes. And so what's going to happen is at the beginning of and you may have seen this if you've been watching my streams, you choose between 3 possible missions that you can do, and they have a different land value, and that's the amount of land that you can gain when you win that mission. If you lose that mission, you lose some land as well. And so there's this like give and take about like, and so then that would inform the actual gameplay by being like, at a certain point, you might be like, you know what, I think I should just surrender this one and lose this battle because I don't want to like lose all my units and stuff. Because there is like a unit permadeath kind of thing. And yeah, we can get more into the details of the gameplay, but I think this was pretty good. And I've been going for about 2.5 hours, so I think I'm going to call it a day. But thank you, everyone, for hanging out. And this was a really good one. I will probably post this on YouTube. And yeah, as always, I'll be here again tomorrow. What am I doing tomorrow? Let's find out. Tomorrow, apparently I'm working on this game called Gem Wizard's Tactics. Who knew? Maybe tomorrow I can work a little bit. We'll work a little bit on the story. If y'all want to come by, we'll start like working that out. And that'll be at 2 p.m. tomorrow. And yeah, on Wednesday I'm working on Gem Wizard's Tactics as well. Story. Yeah, and then we don't have a topic yet for Thursday. Friday, I'm going to try to play Noita and also some community games. So yeah, that's the week ahead of us. Thank you for joining me today, and this has been the Clockwork Gamedev Show. I'm Keith Burgun, and of course you can support my work over at patreon.com/KeithBurgun. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.